It's a pleasure to be with all of you here today. Thank you so much for giving us your attention before lunch. So we'll try to be as expeditious as possible. This time slot works really well for us because we're all from the West Coast. So we said at 8:30 it's not going to work for us. That's 5:30 on the West Coast. So this time slot is agreeable to us. So let me jump right in. I like to start out with a quiz typically. So what are all these afflictions having in common when we look at this list? Falls, dehydration, abdominal pain, UTI, medical compliance, COPD. Do these things look familiar to everybody in the audience? These are among the top 10 reasons of preventable hospitalizations of seniors, right? Things like falls. Every 11 seconds, a senior is hospitalized because of a fall. Every 19 minutes, a senior dies from injuries sustained from falls. Similar statistics or other kinds of statistics for dehydration, abdominal pain, et cetera. These are the kinds of problems that seniors are having today, and these problems are going to grow as our population ages. At the same time, we have all these different kinds of technologies that I'm sure all of you have heard about. Some of our panelists and keynotes have already talked about the disruptive nature of artificial intelligence and robotics and Internet of Things and sensor technology, et cetera. So what we're going to try to talk about today is the kinds of problems that seniors face, and at the same time, what are some of the technologies that can help us solve those problems. So these are among the most disruptive innovations. We hear about companies like Uber and Amazon and Google. We know about all the fancy things that they're doing. But what I would like to put forward is these disruptions have not yet transformed senior living. And that's really what we're about here today and over these several days, is figuring out how we leverage this technology to disrupt senior living and to enhance the quality of life, not only for the seniors, but for the caregivers as well. So today we're going to talk broadly about three different areas. We're going to talk about the adoption of technology in senior living, issues about privacy and security, very, very important as we monitor and observe more and more through automated means. Where does all the data go? Who's securing it? What about privacy concerns? And then thirdly, standards. This is an industry that definitely needs standards. We heard from our keynote speaker last night about building Lego blocks that are interchangeable. Standards, particularly in the realm of software, are critically important. So this is our distinguished panel. Let me tell you a little bit about SRI International by playing a short video. So let's move on to that so you know what SRI is about.
SRI is a nonprofit research institution. We do research mostly sponsored by the US government. We also work with commercial companies to work on the most exciting and important research, spanning across disciplines of academic interest. SRI is a place that incubates companies regularly. We spin out several companies a year, and these companies take the ideas from SRI research projects and turn them into practical reality that can actually go to market.
Okay, so that's a very short introduction of SRI. After the panel discussion, if anybody wants to know more about that robot that was riding a motorcycle, I'm very happy to tell you about that. So that's SRI. What I do at SRI is I run what we call our Studio for Aging. So we're basically trying to look at how we take and fuse together all the different sciences, from physics to medicine to nutrition, computer sciences, biological sciences, and innovate in the space of aging population. So with that, let me then introduce Dale Boyles from Alliance Residential Company. Dale, say a few words, please.
Good morning. Alliance Residential is the largest apartment developer in the United States. High lifestyle amenitized buildings. We have about 8,000 units a year, and then we manage about 100,000 apartments. My role, 2 years ago, I joined to head up the senior housing development effort and to take their concepts on lifestyle and design and best in class and to apply that onto our senior housing platform. and I do that across about 2/3 of the United States.
Thank you very much, Dale. So I guess my order on the slide is not the order we are here on stage, but we can deal with that. So next, Marjorie, if you could please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Marjorie Todd. I work with Highgate Senior Living. Prior to that, I was with a large publicly traded assisted living and senior housing company. Highgate Senior Living is a small, privately held company. We operate communities in Montana, Washington, Arizona, California, and Nevada. And I do serve as COO there. I enjoy it a lot because it's small enough that I can keep my hands in things, and I get to spend time with the residents. That's what really matters to me.
Thank you, Marjorie. Rich Heaton from Blue Willow.
All right, thank you. Hi. So yeah, I'm with Blue Willow. We're actually exhibiting here, which is a really great experience for us to come and talk to folks like yourselves. We're also very fortunate in that we're a tenant within the Studio for Aging within SRI. So that means we get to mind melds and such with folks like Edgar and his teams. So Blue Willow is building a platform that is bringing together a range of some of those buzzwords you saw on that slide with all those lists of technologies. So, we as a company are really bringing those sets of technologies together and trying to encapsulate them in a way that brings some critical solutions to the senior care space. So.
Very good. Thank you, Rich. Let's go ahead and get started. So as I mentioned, these are kind of the three areas that we're going to be covering today. I'd like to start out with adoption. So in particular, I'd like to ask Dale and Marjorie. Let's start with Dale. What's the lay of the land today in terms of technology adoption? As I visit senior living centers, I still see issues with even having wireless internet or touch screens or getting Skype to work. And here we are talking about artificial intelligence and robotics. So if you could kind of paint what's the lay of the land? Where is technology today in senior living?
Yeah, I think in my background, I've been in development for the last couple of years, but the last 20 years in operations, predominantly with the big three publicly traded organizations. So you're right. Historically, we came from it's people caring for people, and technology didn't see this as a sexy space. And so I think we just focused on basic blocking and tackling of trying to make a difference and to gauge and to manage residents' changing care. As technology has come in, I think all of us recognize the need to adopt technology, but you're right, I think there's some significant challenges. We have old physical plants. A lot of our buildings don't have Wi-Fi in those buildings, as simple as that sounds. Every coffee shop in America does, but a lot of our buildings do not, so we're in a big rush to try to implement just a backbone system. And then a lot of the providers, the vendors, I think there's a lot of amazing ideas, especially at this conference. But as a larger operator, a lot of it's more piecemeal. So you're trying to have to pick and choose what's the most important, maybe for my company at my growth stage. Is it an EHR? What is it that I need at this point? Because there's so many different choices out there. It's like 31 flavors of ice cream. It's hard to implement. So I think right now we're trying everyone's rushing to understand what it is and then what's the most impactful for my business today.
Very good. Thank you, Marjorie. Your perspective.
I was thinking about it, and the three customers that I kind of work in service to, the resident, their family, and then my team, our residents are actually pretty excited and pretty frosty with some of the technology that has to do with engagement, quality of life, programming. We just had a couple of residents that virtually attend a many-year high school reunion. They love seeing their new grandbabies being born via Skype. Some of the programming pieces that they get to enjoy on Facebook and learning new things online has been really a space that they've been really focusing on lately. Our families seem to be very much into the technology that has to do with communication. They want to be reached in the way and the time and the speed that they want to be reached. So we have to work individually. Some people, they want that text update about their mom. Some people want that service plan that comes to them via Echo Sign. Some people still want to sit down face to face and go through it line by line. So I think that one of our challenges has been to meet that family where they are with their communication need in the way that they want to receive it. And then our team, I just looked at it the other day, 62.5% of my team are millennials. So they are certainly embracing the technology, the devices, that kind of thing. And so trying to stay relevant, to keep them engaged, and to make their jobs as easy as I can, that's kind of where we are right now.
Okay, excellent. I'd like to also get Rich in the discussion. So as Rich mentioned about Blue Willow Systems, they're producing wearable devices on a cloud platform so that you can detect falls that are happening in your senior living facility without actually anybody being there, and then you can alert a caregiver. So this is definitely cutting edge technology. And I'd be interested, Rich, for you to talk about how can companies such as yourselves get into senior living centers? What are some of the challenges that you see to engage and prove the value of the business that you have?
Sure. I think that in some respects, I don't think senior living is any different than any other industry where you're trying to break in as a new vendor, trying to bring some new products. I think that some of the good things about it are that, as we've all been saying, there are not already a long list of technologies and a long list of vendors that are supplying to it. That means that we as a small company have to break into that in that respect. So I think the challenges are somewhat different here for us, which is that not only we're a new company that has to find ways to get in touch with people, convey our message, and so forth. I think that the way in which technology is viewed is different from the Silicon Valley bubble that we sit within. Silicon Valley sees technology for its own sake, and that's enough of an explanation as to why you should want it. And I think that really the learning that I've gone through as we've engaged with folks like Marjorie and other folks in the audience is that that's not good enough. We have to actually be solving a true problem and be doing it in a way that means that we are really not the vendor of the week. I think that any company, but especially small companies without much of a brand name, have to be able to work with partners and work with companies like yourselves in a way that doesn't just try to be transactional. And I think that's really critical to try to bring the technologies from that Silicon Valley bubble into the broader senior living space, is to take that approach towards it and to try to really partner through the process.
Thank you, Rich. So another area I wanted to jump into that relates to adoption, and Marjorie already started talking about this, is that there are different end users. We have the residents, the families, and then the caregivers themselves. And their needs, their challenges are vastly different. So when we talk about technology adoption, I think we have to address all three of those constituents. So Margie, could you expand a little bit on how you see technology addressing each of those? And should we address one category before we address other categories?
I'm kind of amazed at some of the residents that are within my communities and how interested they are and how much they want to know about what's out there. And they want to learn how to use their iPad, and they want to understand Netflix, and they want to watch the movies they want to watch, and they want to plug up my wireless network with their Netflix streaming. So now we have two. We have a resident network and a community-based network. So I always have to remind myself to take a step back and think, hey, this is not me making a value judgment on what they want. But as several people have already referenced today, it's more about asking them what they want and exposing them to the options that exist out there. I think our clinical teams they will always struggle to find what empowers them to create the best clinical outcomes for their residents. They feel a stewardship for the residents that are within their care. So whatever we can bring to them that allows them to provide that good clinical assessment, the judgments that they have to make every day, the easiest things that I can provide to them that make that job better, I think is something that I hear from a lot of our nurses, a lot of our care coordinators. And I think the families really they want that communication at their level. They want to know the information when they want to know it, and I'm sure many of you deal with family members that will challenge you in getting that information in the way they want to receive it.
Dale, from your perspective.
Yeah, I obviously agree with Marjorie. I was also thinking of kind of the other side, though, is where you have conflict between those three parties. So you have something, the kind of classic adult daughter may want pervasive monitoring and believe that there's something nefarious going on in the room. There are residents being abused, the residents having their jewelry stolen, so she wants coverage. And then you as the operator are saying, well, I have my employee who wants privacy when they're providing intimate care to that resident. So you kind of have that conflicting schedule of where that technology should be and who gets access to it. I was also thinking as you're speaking, as a former operator, do I want my caregiver who's passionate and maybe wants to do the right thing communicating directly to the daughter without maybe another person who says, yeah, we agree with that. Unfortunately, I've been on the wrong side of too many lawsuits, and that, attorneys love kind of communication that way too. So I think technology is providing this amazing platform and allowing us to communicate, but it also sets up different challenges with trying to meet the needs and trying to be in real time and trying to be respectful, but also to understand the three different parties and what that means to licensing, what it has to legal implications, and then obviously at the end game is trying to enhance the quality of life for all of the residents, but there's other things out there that have real impact to your business.
Great, thank you. Rich, anything you'd like to add?
Well, I think as a technology vendor, as an engineer, I like to think technology can solve all those problems. But I think realistically, I certainly think that there are ways in which you can do things to provide the various constituencies what they want, and yet be careful about not conveying things that are somewhat not filtered. And I do think that the technologies can be helping in that respect. But at the end of the day, this is a caring business, and there are people involved with every single piece of it. And I think that means that the technology has to fit that, not the other way around. And that means that as you're building these technologies, you want to make sure that you're taking this into account. One of the things in our particular case is, we provide a system that does what it does to provide alerting and insights and dashboarding to the caregiving staff. Some subset of that may be applicable and appropriate to give to the families. But I think in the conversations that we've had with various folks like yourselves, that's a very critical area to consider, is to make sure that we don't just start firing off all this information, all this data that we may have. It's got to be done in the right way. So I think at the end of the day, it comes down to the same type of thing that it always will, which is that technologies have to go hand in hand with the human factor.
Excellent, thank you. So I think this is a good segue into the next topic around privacy and security. So we all know about Amazon Echo and the new device that Amazon's coming out with now. It actually can collect video of what's going on and understand gestures and things like that. So it strikes me that there's got to be a big concern that here we have a device potentially that's going to be in senior living that can do 24/7 recording of what's happening in the room, both audio and visual. That sets up huge concerns for privacy and security. Huge opportunity, because we could see what are the change in patterns, what's somebody's cough pattern while they're sleeping. Is there a problem with shortness of breath? Are they wheezing at night? All these different things that could be medically very important. At the same time, it's very invasive. So I'd like to probe with the panel a little bit around the privacy and security concerns. So Marjorie, could start with you. How do you deal with privacy and security today, and what kind of legal issues do you see with being able to put an Amazon Echo in a room?
Sure. I think any operator in this room has been hit with the Granny Cam surprise. I know I certainly have. It's always great to hear about. But when you operate in different states, you have to take into account the legalities in each state. But most importantly, what we coach our teams to do is, what is the right thing to do? If you come upon a Granny Cam, what is the right thing to do first for the resident? And so we do have a lot of adult children who perhaps in their overzealousness to take care of mom, think that they should be monitoring mom 24/7. And that's some education. That's some difficult conversations with family members about, does your mom want this? Does your mom want to be monitored by you? Would you like it? Probably not. So we start with education, for some of the privacy concerns that we see existing. And, the other concern that we have is for our team members, thinking about it through an HR lens. Those team members have the right to know that they may be under video surveillance. So we've been successful in some cases in deterring and removing those cameras. In other cases, not so much. And then we just need to do what's right for the resident, talk to them about it. First and foremost, get their consent that this is what they want in their apartment. And then we, service plan it, we document it. Unfortunately for some of my marketing folks, there's a little sign on the door that they don't like to see there, but it's the right thing to do. So even something as simple as billing, the resident account status, and the payment, options can present with some privacy concerns. I still have residents that they want to bring that check down to the desk. Once a month, they got to write that check. It's a paper check. They want to give it to you, put it in your hand. Then we have some family members who they just want their points on their credit cards, and then we have some that want their EFT so they don't have to be bothered with it. But all of that, the different levels of receiving payment, even means we have privacy concerns around that. So we try to work on that as well. But there's lots of opportunity.
Right, great. So Rich, thank you, Marjorie. Rich, you work in this space, and you've got wearable devices and a cloud computing platform. Maybe tell the audience how you're working to ensure that privacy and security is being ensured with your solution.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we are fortunate in the sense that we were able to start building this platform, a year and a half now, 2 years ago, knowing full well that these are the issues. We didn't get surprised after the fact by having to figure out how to retrofit. So I think that the starting point for it really is that architecturally within the framework of our system, it's been built in from day one. That I think is the starting point. And the recognition that the security is really critical to the whole system. Now, of course, there's various standards that you have to follow that really range from best practices all the way through legal types of standards. The standard, the typical one people talked about is HIPAA. In my perspective, HIPAA is a starting point. It really represents what would otherwise be considered best practices in terms of the actual security being implemented. There's the whole notifications parts of it, of course. But from the technology side of it, HIPAA represents a baseline of how do you make sure that the data is being protected such that it's not accessible by the incorrect people, or if it does get accessed, you can determine that and notify. Going beyond that, I think that there, again, back to the same point, there's human factors elements to these equations. And I think that you often find in security there's a balancing act being done here. I think for those of us who have to do signatures on corporate accounts, having to have that little dongle on your keychain that you then punch that code in, plus your password, plus these, and two-factor authentication, you can get progressively much more locked down with respect to how you secure all of that information. But that comes at the cost of convenience. I don't know that we would want the staff members and the caregivers to have to carry one of those dongles around to have them be able to access the various systems for EHR and everything. We know that that's a better approach. It is certainly much more secure, but it comes at the cost of real workflows and pragmatic approaches. So I think that you've got to take the security posture, so to speak, that you want to have and balance that with the ability to make that pragmatic. And I think that's really probably the most difficult part of it, if you ask me.
Rich, thank you. So Dale, perhaps you could follow up on that. Rich makes a really excellent point about, we can make things very, very secure, but then they're inconvenient, and perhaps the caregivers don't want to adopt it. Say, we're just not even going to use this system. It's too obtrusive for us to do our work. Oops, sorry about that. Could you pick up on that?
First of all, the caregiver's role is challenging enough, right? That's really where the rubber hits the road, is when a caregiver is providing that care, that intimate care. and the resident is always not a pleasant, welcoming person. I mean, you're dealing with people with dementia and a whole host of issues. So exactly, I mean, in my perspective, technology has to be seamless, has to be easy, has to make their jobs easier. I remember back in the old days, we used to give them these old kind of telephone radios. They were dropping, they would end up in the toilet, and then they said, well, forget it, I'm not going to carry it with me because it's not functional. So, you know, they're the ones that are out there on a minute-by-minute basis. So how do we keep something easy? And I keep coming back to, you know, how do we, from security, how do we provide dignity to our residents in a platform that where it allows them to say, you know, I don't want to be monitored. Maybe I have a intimate situation where, you know, you have a couple that they've become a couple since living at the building. We all know that that happens. My biggest fear would be, do I have a passive monitoring system that overhears something that shouldn't be overheard? So how do we create privacy and dignity in allowing that resident at times to shut it off? I think Tom mentioned the idea of the predictive analytics. I get really excited by that. I think that's the wave of the future, because you're right. How do we know when someone's having a heart attack? How do we know when something is bad is going to happen, as you opened with your first slides? So that's the balance between, you know, people doing kind of stupid things, the videotape of the caregiver who videotaped a couple intimate situation and posted it on the website. I mean, that just breaks my heart and it frustrates me to no end. And how do you, from a privacy perspective, make sure that that can never happen? Right. But as we know, technology is so pervasive and it's going to be passive monitoring. It's a real challenge, I think, going forward, is creating that balance, doing what's right for the resident, providing dignity to the resident, meeting the family's needs, and some of the families going to want instantaneous, you know, communication, versus what is practical as an operator. I don't know how you can instantaneously communicate to families, you know, hey, your mom ate lunch and she ate 3 quarters. I mean, it's going to be interesting as you guys develop systems that allow us as the operator, but never forget it's people caring for people. And that's kind of what draws me to this industry is I don't care how big you are or how small you are, it's really how do you ensure mission, vision, values all the way through your organization. So, and technology should always be focused on those 3 things.
Great. So let's move into the third area on standards. So I think, as we all know, that, you know, any ecosystem of producers and consumers needs to have standards. We heard from our keynote speaker at dinner last night about defining those interfaces, right? So we can have more plug-and-play kinds of technology, Lego blocks, if you will, for senior living, not just in constructing facilities, as he was talking about, but also in these kinds of monitoring capabilities that we'd like to put into the apartments. So standards, I think, are a key thing. So I'd like to start with Rich. So basically, could you maybe talk about how you see standards evolving, or the need for standards to evolve, so we can kind of de-risk it for the operators to say, look, I'm adhering to this standard, so if you decide to swap me out for someone else's technology next year, you'll continue to work seamlessly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, ultimately I've spent a long time in technology, and particularly on the networking side, and that one of the strengths of that industry, the ability for it to be as pervasive, is based upon the fact that everybody in this room can use their Wi-Fi, and we probably all have different devices in our pocket. And so I think that being able to mix and match technologies is essentially done by virtue of standards that lets them interoperate that way. I think in this space, there are certainly standards already in place. Some of those are regulatory, that define things that require nurse calls to have certain, you know, capabilities. But I think that, you know, when we start talking about the somewhat more advanced technology that we're referring to here, being able to create seamless interconnects between a system like ours, which makes use of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth at basic standard levels of interactions, as well as the more complex interactions between the data. You know, where does the data move, and how does the data move back and forth between various systems like ours, like an EHR platform, like, you know, EMR platforms or anything like that. I think that, you know, again, the way in which those systems can become interconnected in a very seamless way, so that if a little small company that you guys take a risk on, does something stupid and goes away, you're not left holding a bag. And I think that's a very critical observation. I mean, we all know this is true, that that's the challenge of a small company coming into a new space is that fear. So I think that fear can be mitigated as you start to bring progressively more standardized interfaces between those kinds of systems so that you can be more mixed and matched between them. So I believe strongly that that's helpful to all of us.
So Dale, you're building new facilities, new residential living. Are you trying to grab onto standards as you're building out those facilities?
Yeah, I mean, I looked at it as a backbone. So the way we work is we'll build independent assisted and memory care buildings, and then we'll also do a 55 plus high lifestyle type of building. And I look at Wi-Fi as the backbone of the building. I want to make sure it's as robust as it can be. And then when I engage a third-party operator, they can plug in their systems. And so that's kind of that's a standard for us, right? At every single unit, I don't want to have any dark spots. So the residents can come in if they want to use an iPod, but iPad, it's all kind of built in as robust as a developer, because I don't know what's going to come down the line 5 years, 10 years. I'm just trying to do, like we heard last night, try to do a modular type of design that somebody can enhance, plug and play going forward as all the wonderful new technology is coming available.
Great, Marjorie.
I looked at standards and I thought about operational standards when you posed this question earlier. And two things that have really resonated with our organization. One, you have to provide new training and relevant training to your team. You can't take for granted that they're going to behave themselves with social media, with the access that you give them, and often it's good intentioned and misguided slips of privacy and information that shouldn't be communicated. So just our organization has had to adopt an electronic security standards type training for this very purpose. And then secondly, as Dale has said a couple of times, no matter what kind of robots come along to give care, it is still a human-to-human business. And our standard in our organization is no device sits between me and a resident. No nurse holds a device up and does a checkbox assessment when they're interviewing a resident for their clinical and their psychosocial and their medical needs. So our standards are kind of more operational, but I think I like them.
Great, great. So one of the things that in this area of standards that we were talking about over dinner last night is actually an opportunity for Senior Living Innovation Forum perhaps to be a driver of standards in this space. As we kind of survey the industry, as we mentioned, there's some standardization going on, but perhaps this is an opportunity for this body to actually get very active in the space and actually propose something going forward. So very quickly, as we have a few minutes left, I'd like each of the panelists, starting with Dale, just to comment on, should Senior Living Innovation Forum drive standards?
Should it?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
this body, this group of people.
Exactly. I think the big challenge as an operator, is, we got raising wages, right? So we have wage expansion, you have NOI compression, wage compression. So how I have all these costs and technology, we all agree we need, but every time we hear it, it's just more cost going into the equation. And so some of it you're saying, well, can I pass it over to the resident? Is that the right thing to do? Do I have to adopt this to be competitive with the new guy down the block, let's say, because we're all worried about new competition? And so if we have standards that will help make these things easier to adopt, quicker to adopt, and ultimately it's going to enhance resident quality of life faster. So the sooner we can get to that as an industry, because in my experience, again, over the last 20 years, just a lot of piecemeal. I mean, even a marketing system wasn't feeding into a healthcare records. It's like, why do I have to input all this data 2 or 3 times when it should be, from the lead all the way through? It should just start feeding it, right, all the way through monitoring and communicating back to the families. We're getting better, but standards are going to make a huge difference.
Great. Rich, is this an opportunity for everyone in the
I
audience?
think so. I mean, when I look at the birds of a feather, the people who are interested in things like this, the challenges for operators to adopt new technologies is in part the concern that it's just not going to be around for the long term. You're buying something you're going to paint yourself into a corner with. If we're able to define the right degrees of standardization, we'll start to reap the benefits as Ethernet did when it was originally envisioned. Before that, you had 10 different kinds of standards to connect computers to each other. And I think that it was only by virtue of the standards that led to enough critical mass of vendors like ourselves being able to participate in that ecosystem that really drives the cost down and makes the broader applicability to it. So yeah, I'm a big fan of standards. I think they really help drive adoptions for these things. I think the critical thing really is to identify, I guess I'd call it a taxonomy. What is the areas that really deserve that focus? And who would be the participants? And there's a few different groups within the industry that are starting to do this kind of a thing. But I feel like there really needs to get to that point of critical mass where it includes developers, looking at the earlier stages of the life cycle of a building, operators who've got the hands-on, we need to do this, vendors like myself and plenty of the others in the audience here. I think you bring that set of groups of folks together, and you should be able to then identify that list of areas that need that standard approach because it's maybe cutting edge. Maybe that's the area of concern and risk that you don't want to take on entirely. Focus on getting those to work. Or I know I've had the same conversation with a number of folks in the audience, Dale, just before we started, that the interconnection between all these things, a lot of folks are looking to try to see how you can connect these various systems that already exist together. The easiest way to do that is to have that be done through standards where they just will work. They plug them together and it works as opposed to having to be a custom effort every single time. So yeah.
Great. Marjorie, would you like to add?
I think those of us who worked in skilled nursing and then moved over to senior housing several years ago felt a sense of enlightenment. I get to do new things and I get to be innovative and try different solutions. So I feel passionate that the senior living industry in general, the 55 plus, the retirement, the assisted living, and even the skilled nursing needs to continue to be cognizant that we don't become too standardized. But I also recognize the value in that. I think people need to be able to have choice and freedom to participate, but the regulations are coming towards us anyway in assisted living, so we can't be blind to that.
Excellent. Thank you, Marjorie. We have about a minute and a half or 2 minutes left. I'd like to ask the audience if you have some questions for our panelists. Or is it that everybody wants to go to lunch?
Yeah, lunch. Lunch.
One question. Come on, we need one question.
Any questions?
Can't see.
Oh, there's one in the back here, Michael.
Let me bring the mic down to you.
I can't see.
Okay, let's talk about interoperability.
Oh,
There you go.
So when's it going to happen? And is government going to be responsible for making it happen?
Well, maybe I'll take that one.
Please go ahead.
So, I think that, there's a couple different parts to your question there. How's government's role and when's it going to happen and what is interoperability? I think I would go back to my earlier point, which is you got to start with asking the question, interoperability between what to what? I think the classic question probably on the minds here is EHR systems and EMR systems, safety systems, all this other monitoring of stuff that we're pulling out. How do you pull those together? Am I seeing their question correctly? Okay. Sorry.
I'm basically asking about health data.
Okay.
Connections to a hospital.
Okay. Okay, so you're asking more specifically around interoperability between health data and the standards for health exchanges and HL7 and such. And so government has driven the standardization for those. Now, when I look at it, I think that's a starting point. I think that it needs to get a little more advanced. It was, I think, a rudimentary approach. I think that too much data ends up being encoded within generic fields between the exchange protocols. So I do think that to make it broadly applicable, it's got to go another step beyond where it was. And I think it's going down that path, but I don't know that we're there yet. I think for a company like ourselves, I will speak to us alone, I would be absolutely ecstatic to be able to say I can speak HL7 and it will just work with everybody. So.
Great. I think we're out of time, so let me thank our panel for joining me here on stage today and wish everyone a very successful remainder of this forum. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.